Who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is George Collins, and for the next hour, I will be reading from the February 13th, 2026 Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The Olympics are on everybody's mind, and everybody's interested in the Olympics. A Ukrainian athlete was disqualified from the Winter Olympics on Thursday for wearing a helmet that featured images of Ukrainian athletes that were killed during the Russian invasion, according to the International Olympic Committee. Although the athlete wore the helmet throughout training, the IOC ruled that the design violated the Olympic guidelines and could not be worn in competition. The 27-year-old athlete, who wasn't among the favorites to win a medal, was due to start competing yesterday, on Thursday. "It's hard to put into words," the athlete said of the decision. "I do not get my moment at this Olympics." Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky awarded him an Order of Freedom and said that 660 Ukrainian athletes and coaches have been killed by Russia in the war. God, it's so tragic. Zelensky said sport should not mean amnesia, and the Olympic movement should help stop wars, not play into the hands of the aggressors, said Zelensky, which he posted on X. The athlete's helmet featured a muted gray background that breaks into a mosaic of faces of around 20 Ukrainian athletes and coaches who were killed so far during their country's war with Russia. Moscow, of course, launched its full-scale invasion of the country shortly after the end of the 2022 Beijing Games. The IOC said that it had tried to find a compromise, including offering the athlete the option of displaying his helmet immediately after the competition and wearing a black armband. The IOC said that its guidelines on athlete expression were the result of a global consultation in 2021 involving 3,500 athletes from around the world. The IOC president, Kirsty Coventry, said, "It's not about the messaging. It's literally about the rules and regulations." Coventry met the athlete and his dad on Thursday morning. "I wanted to see him race today. I really did, and it's been an emotional morning," said Coventry. The IOC later said that the athlete can keep his accreditation and stay at the games despite not being able to compete. He was the flag bearer for Ukraine at last week's opening ceremony, and he said that, quote, "people's lives are more important," close quote, than the competition, urging the global community to keep supporting Ukraine. The athlete's ban was the latest episode in a long history of IOC sanctions against athletes who make political statements. The Ukrainian team said that they would appeal the decision at the Court of Arbitration for Sport, and so that was unfortunate. And then NBC's roving correspondent, Snoop Dogg, has conquered the Olympics yet again. It was just past 9 p.m. This is a writer by the name of Jason Gay who writes, "It was just past 9 p.m. when I was summoned to a windowless room in a windowless studio to reunite with the emperor of the Olympic Games, Snoop Dogg. He wore sunglasses inside and nibbled from a bag of Italian potato chips. He's taller than you might expect. He's 6'4". He'd just come from the speed skating rink where he'd sat with another legend, Eric Heiden, and watched the phenom Jordan Stolz collect his first gold in the 1,000 meters. Eric Heiden was telling me, said Snoop, that the one thing about Jordan is that his close is better than his start, said Snoop, taking a seat on the couch. What Heiden said would happen is exactly what happened. Stoles roared from behind to win and break the Olympic record. Snoop said, quote, gold, baby, close quote. The platinum rapper was draped in a flag-printed leather jacket with USA on the sleeve. He rocked a pair of red pants in a way you or I cannot rock a pair of red pants. He wore a fur hat. He looked exactly like you'd think Snoop Dogg would look at the Winter Olympics. I'd met him once before at the Paris Games in 2024. In Milan, he is NBC's roving correspondent and Team USA's first ever honorary coach. Some might call that a conflict of interest, but it's all just part of a dog's life. Everyone wants Snoop. I asked what his 25-year-old hip-hop star self would have thought if I told him what he'd be doing now, and Snoop said, I'd say you were lying. You're telling a big-ass lie. I don't have the vision of even being in this position at that age. Never aspired to be connected to the Olympics, but always had love for sports. It just felt like it organically grew into what it was supposed to be based on the love that I have for human beings, for sport, and for the country that I'm from. By now, Snoop's transformation from hip-hop renegade to ubiquitous personality / pitchman is old news. Midlife Snoop is the establishment. He's a company pillar. As if to underline the point, he wore a medallion around his neck featuring NBC's Peacock logo. Being on TV is intimate work, not for everyone. The people who are the best at it make it seem effortless, even when it isn't, which is what Snoop does. Alliteration and memorable one-liners roll off him, like when he told NBC host Mike Tirico that skater Ilya Milanin's scores were off the FM dial. Like 108 something, he said. Snoop said he struggled with TV at first. He didn't want to look into the camera. He said he was so unsure of himself, but once I figured out that it isn't about the camera, it's about me mastering who I am, I'm always going to be me, and when the camera catches it, it catches the magic I live with every day. In his role as honorary coach, Snoop said his role was to mentor and inspire U.S. athletes. He'd been to tons of places already. He'd gone to the Olympic Village, ice hockey, speed skating, and curling. He dropped in on Quad God Melanin, I'm not sure what that means, Quad God Melanin, and the NHL Moonlighters. He was in the stands when Lindsey Vonn crashed out in the downhill. And that's what it's all about, Snoop said, being there for people. These Olympians, almost none of them were alive when Snoop broke into music. The lithe kid from Long Beach, right alongside Dr. Dre, he found himself relating just as well to their parents. The parents are more my age, he said. It's like we grew up together. His schedule for Milan Cortina was relentless, going from ice skating rinks to mountains, endlessly on the go. The time difference back to the United States was no joke. I asked him, what time do you hit the hay? Snoop said, hit the hay? I hit the hay all day. I was trying to hit the hay before you came in. He chuckled. But as far as going to sleep, let's say, for example, if my day tomorrow starts at 10 a.m. and we have to leave the hotel by 11 a.m., I won't go to bed until 9:30 a.m. I don't know if that makes any sense. If my day tomorrow starts at 10 a.m. and we have to leave the hotel by 11 a.m., I don't know. Sorry. Was there anywhere on earth he could go, relax, and just be Snoop? He said, Bora Bora. I'm going there when I leave here. People left Snoop alone in Bora Bora? ? He nodded. Okay. Let's see here. Did the U.S. lose the gold medal on some controversial calls? When they stepped off the ice on Wednesday night, U.S. figure skaters Madison Chock and Evan Bates believed they delivered a performance worthy of Olympic gold. America's top ice dancers came to the Winter Games as three-time reigning world champions once they received their score that put them in first place. Chalk and Bates watched the last dance of the night in the one team between them and the top of the podium. Despite skating together for less than a year, the French duo of Laurence Fournier-Boudre and Guillaume Cizeron had the lead when the night began, but with the Olympic title on the line, they made visible errors. When it became clear that the gold medal was in the hands of the judges, the entire arena held its breath. As soon as the French edged out the Americans, figure skating officially had its Olympic judging controversy. Bates said it's a very subjective sport. We felt like we skated a winning performance. On Thursday, he said he wasn't ruling out a challenge to the results. He said, I know the competition is over, and a rational mind would say, it's done. He said, but you never know. If there were any event in figure skating that was going to descend into a judging debacle, it was always going to be ice dance. Once the scores were in, the scoring questions were inevitable. Why wasn't Cizeron, the French skater, penalized more on his messy twizzles? What about the French team's wobbly step sequence? Were Chalk and Bates's slips dinged too harshly? Unlike judging furors from the 1990s and 2000s, this time there was social media for angry fans to dissect videos and zoom in on every potential misstep. And they were already in a frenzy over the French ice dancers long before the Olympics. Fournier-Boudre and Cizeron were only a team because her longtime boyfriend and dance partner for Team Canada was suspended from the sport. When Canada's sports integrity body found that Nikolai Sorensen sexually assaulted an American skater in 2012, his career was over. And it appears hers was too. Then she paired up with Cizeron, who came to Milan with his own baggage. He won Olympic gold in 2022 with Gabriela Papadakis, but they never competed together again after that year. In a book published last month, Papadakis called him, quote, demanding and controlling, close quote. Cizeron denies the allegations. The hastily arranged partnership of Fournier-Boudre and Cizeron arrived as a gold medal contender and villains in the eyes of figure skating's most passionate fans. Even after both teams were off the ice Wednesday night, it seemed like the gold could go either way. But the only opinions that mattered belonged to the 9 judges. Madison Chalk said that's just how it shakes out, through tears. By Thursday, she was less sanguine. I think there needs to be some sort of judgment for the judges, she said, so that we know we're getting the best from the judges and have a level and fair playing field for all athletes. They work so hard to make it happen, and it's painful to listen to. All right, let's go to the front page. President Trump's border czar said the administration is ending its crackdown in Minnesota, wrapping up an operation that sparked outrage after the fatal shooting of 2 U.S. citizens and prompted Democrats in Congress to block funding for the Department of Homeland Security. Tom Homan, who was dispatched to the state last month to de-escalate tensions, said the Trump administration achieved its public safety goals, making more than 4,000 arrests in the state. About 3,000 U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement and Border Patrol agents have operated in the state in what the Trump administration dubbed Operation Metro Surge. Quote, in the next week, we are going to deploy those officers here on detail back to their home stations or other areas of the country where they are needed, said Homan, while pledging to continue to arrest people living illegally in the country, one of Trump's biggest policy priorities. That's what the American people voted for, said Homan. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz condemned the 2-month-plus surge, calling it, quote, an unnecessary, unwarranted, and in many cases unconstitutional assault on our state. The enforcement actions left us with deep damage and generational trauma, said Walz. And let me just pause to wet my whistle. And may I also take this opportunity to remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. So the announcement of withdrawing the ICE agents came after a public outcry over the killings of Renee Good and Alex Pretty, both 37 years old, in confrontations with immigration agents. So disgusting. The decision to wind down the operation marks a pivotal moment in the national debate over immigration policy, with many Americans favoring Trump's push to deport people in the U.S. illegally, but recoiling at the increasingly chaotic scenes in Minneapolis. Citing the shootings, Democrats on Capitol Hill have said they will not approve funding for DHS, which is the Department of Homeland Security, which oversees ICE, unless congressional Republicans in the White House agree to sweeping restrictions on immigration enforcement operations. Some Democrats have demanded the resignation of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, whom Trump has continued to support, not surprisingly. Senate Democrats on Thursday blocked a measure to fund the Department of Homeland Security through the end of the fiscal year in September, saying that they had not made enough progress in negotiations with Republicans. The vote failed with 52 in favor and 47 opposed, which was short of the 60 votes needed to advance. Funding for DHS is set to lapse this weekend. Democrats' demands include an end to roving street patrols by immigration agents, tighter rules governing searches and use of force, independent investigations for officer misconduct, and a prohibition on agents wearing masks. Trump said Democratic demands would make law enforcement officers, quote, totally vulnerable, close quote, and put them in danger, which is false. He added that some of the Democratic demands are very hard to approve. Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, the chamber's Democratic leader, said the administration has felt the heat from voters over Minneapolis. But the administration doesn't actually want to reform ICE, he said, prompting Democrats to push for new laws. A lapse in funding won't have an immediate effect on most DHS operations. Essential workers will continue to report to their jobs, while other workers could be furloughed. Also, ICE agents and Customs and Border Protection have separate funding from Trump's tax law last year that could be tapped to keep funding their operations and avoid any missed paychecks. Federal officials said enforcement agents were initially sent to Minnesota to find immigrants committing crimes after a sprawling welfare fraud scandal involving dozens of state residents of Somali descent gained national attention. Okay, moving on. All right, a federal judge in Washington, D.C. Thursday temporarily blocked Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's move to formally censor and demote Senator Mark Kelly, who is a retired U.S. Navy captain, for his participation in a video calling on U.S. troops to disobey illegal orders or orders that they believe are illegal. Quote, this court has all it needs to conclude that defendants have trampled on Senator Kelly's First Amendment freedoms and threatened the constitutional liberties of millions of military retirees, said Judge Richard Leon, a George Bush appointment, wrote in his ruling. As Bob Dylan famously said, "You don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows." To say the least, our retired veterans deserve more respect from their government, and our Constitution demands that they receive it. The order prevents the Pentagon from moving ahead with its punishment of the Arizona Democrat while he challenges the sanctions. Quote, "Today, a federal court made clear that Pete Hegseth violated the Constitution when he tried to punish me for something I said," said Senator Kelly. "But this case was never just about me. This administration was sending a message to millions of retired veterans that they too can be censored or demoted just for speaking out." Hegseth said in a post on X that the decision would be immediately appealed, saying that sedition is sedition. Unbelievable. The ruling comes after federal prosecutors Tuesday failed to get a grand jury to indict lawmakers who appeared in the 90-second video entitled, quote, "Don't Give Up the Ship," close quote, in which Kelly and Senators Alyssa Slotkin, Jason Crow, Representative Jason Crow, Representative Maggie Goodlander, Chris DeLuzio, and Chrissy Houlihan told military members they can and must refuse illegal orders. In a social media post 2 days after the video was posted online, Trump, of course, accused the lawmakers of, quote, capital letters, seditious behavior, punishable by capital letters, death, exclamation point, close quotes. Unbelievable. Hegseth also accused Kelly of sedition, quote unquote, and treason, quote unquote, and on January 5th issued a secretarial letter of censure against him. The Department of the Navy then initiated proceedings to reduce Kelly's rank and pay. Kelly sued the Defense Department, the U.S. Navy, and other top officials over the move. In his lawsuit, Kelly accused the Trump administration officials of violating the First Amendment by retaliating against him for engaging in protected political speech and the Constitution's separation of powers principle. Kelly's lawyers also argue the statements are protected by the Constitution's speech or debate clause, which gives lawmakers immunity from civil or criminal proceedings that seek to hold them liable for legislative acts. Lawyers for the Trump administration said, quote, the military is not required to tolerate speech by its own members, active or retired, that undermines the chain of command or encourages disobedience or erodes confidence in leadership. Kelly's status as a sitting senator doesn't change that, they said. The speech or debate clause protects legislative acts, not press interviews, social media posts, or exhortations aimed at the public or the chief executive, and particularly not active duty service members, administration lawyers said. On Wednesday, 2 U.S. Navy ships collide during refueling. 2 people reported minor injuries when a U.S. warship and a Navy supply vessel assigned to the military buildup in the Caribbean collided during ship-to-ship refueling, according to military spokesman. The USS Truxtun and the supply-class Fast Combat Support Ship USNS Supply, capital S, collided during a replenishment at sea, according to U.S. Southern Command spokesman Colonel Emmanuel Ortiz. 2 people reported minor injuries and are in stable condition. Both ships have reported that they're able to continue sailing safely, said Ortiz. The cause of the collision isn't yet clear, and the incident is under investigation. The Truxtun left its home port of Norfolk, Virginia on February 6 to begin its scheduled deployment. The other ship, named the Supply, capital S, has been operating in the Caribbean. A U.S. official said the collision was in the Southern Command area of responsibility that includes the Caribbean and parts of the South Atlantic and South Pacific. Separately, in an unrelated incident, a U.S. Marine died after falling from the USS Iwo Jima in the Caribbean on February 7th, which was, I think, last week, said the Marine Corps in their announcement. Lance Corporal Chukwumeka was declared dead after an extensive 72-hour search and rescue operation. The incident is under investigation. All right. In other news, the Justice Department's top antitrust official said she was quitting, capping a rocky year in which she clashed with senior officials who at times favored a more lenient oversight of mergers. Gail Slater said that it is with great sadness and abiding hope that she leaves her role for antitrust, leaves her role as AAG for antitrust today. She wrote in a post on X. It was indeed the honor of a lifetime to serve in this role. Slater's departure opens a leadership vacuum at the Antitrust Division, which is litigating major antitrust lawsuits with defendants like Google, Live Nation, Apple, and Visa. During her 11 months on the job, she often found herself in a political bind, caught between the Trump administration's competing populist and deal-making impulses. From the outset, she aligned with the populist wing, having advised Vice President J.D. Vance during his time in the Senate, where he backed aggressive antitrust enforcement, particularly against big tech. And let me just pause for a little refreshment here. And in other national news, the highly, let me start again. Headline, whistleblower case call refers to Kushner. Secret complaint stems from talk of foreigners about Trump's son-in-law. The highly classified whistleblower complaint against Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard is related to a conversation intercepted last spring in which two foreign nationals discussed Jared Kushner, said U.S. officials familiar with the matter. It could not be determined which country the foreign nationals are from or what they said about Kushner, but the connection to Kushner sheds further light on the top-secret whistleblower complaint that bureaucratically stalled within Gabbard's agency for 8 months and was kept locked in a safe until it reached Congress in a heavily redacted form last week. Senior Trump administration officials said the claims about Kushner were demonstrably false, but declined to offer more specifics about the conversation on grounds that doing so could expose a highly sensitive surveillance method. The allegations in the conversation about Kushner, the president's son-in-law, would be significant if verified, other U.S. officials familiar with the content said. While those officials agreed there was no corroborating evidence to support the allegations, they said that didn't prove that they lacked merit. The Wall Street Journal and others reported last week that the complaint was based on a foreign intelligence conversation collected by the National Security Agency. The conversation included a discussion about a person close to Trump and, at least in part, concerned issues related to Iran, according to the Wall Street Journal. Kushner is at the center of some of the administration's toughest national security initiatives. He devised the plan to rebuild Gaza and has joined Trump envoy Steve Witkoff in negotiations to end the war in Ukraine and dismantle Iran's nuclear work, including a meeting with Iranian officials last week in Oman. Pardon me. Kushner is serving as a volunteer with the Trump administration and does not have a formal U.S. government role. Democratic Senator Mark Warner, who is the top Democrat on the Senate Intelligence Committee, said on Sunday he could not judge the veracity or the credibility of the complaint, in part because the version shared with Congress was so heavily redacted. And redacted means where parts of the document were blacked out. The complaint is so redacted, it's hard to get to the bottom of it, said Warner, adding that he was pressing to obtain the unredacted version as well as the underlying intelligence intercepts at issue. In a letter on Wednesday to Gabbard's office, the whistleblower's attorney, Andrew Bakage, reiterated a request to share the full complaint and underlying intelligence with Congress. He wrote that Gabbard, quote, is deliberately obstructing our client's ability to directly communicate with the Congressional Intelligence Committees and provide a briefing of the contents of their whistleblower complaint. Okay. Well, that's good news that the ICE agents are leaving Minnesota finally. And let me take this opportunity to remind you, you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And speaking about Kristi Noem, it's N-O-E-M, chaos reigns inside of her Homeland Security Department. The secretary's time in the spotlight has dimmed. She knew she needed a reset. It was 2 days after the federal agents had shot and killed Alex Priddy, and Noem was facing fire from all sides. Even some inside the administration were pushing Trump to remove her from her position because of her poor handling of the chaotic immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis, and comments that she'd made saying that the late Mr. Priddy, a former intensive care nurse in Minneapolis, that he had committed an act of domestic terrorism. So Noem's top advisor, Corey Lewandowski, who is one of Trump's trusted foot soldiers, messaged Trump's pollster with a request. They needed to cut an ad to help her, according to two people familiar with the episode. The pollster, Tony Fabrizio, who worked on Trump's 2024 re-election campaign, ignored the entreaty, people said. Throughout her tenure as Secretary of Homeland Security, which is a sprawling agency charged with carrying out Trump's central campaign promise of mass deportation, Noem has attempted to burnish her personal stardom at every turn. With Lewandowski, Trump's former campaign manager, at her side, she has staged a headline-grabbing immigration crackdown while sidelining rivals. She's carried out confrontational operations over the objections of longtime immigration officials who warned such flashy displays would discredit the ultimate mission, according to 24 current and former administration officials. Instead, she's made the case that her approach would lead to more arrests as well as to induce more people to leave on their own. She has put on flak jackets on ice raids, posed carrying a large gun, and recorded messages urging immigrants to self-deport. In one, she stood before a group of imprisoned men with shaved heads packed into tight rows in a notorious El Salvadorian prison. And as she has done, and she has done it all with an eye to her style, with TV-ready hair and makeup. Within DHS, Noam and Lewandowski frequently berate senior-level staff giving polygraph tests to employees and have fired staff. In one incident, for example, Lewandowski fired a U.S. Coast Guard pilot after Noam's blanket was left behind on a plane, according to people familiar with the incident. Simmering criticism over the past year for Noam's policies and publicity moves exploded in Minneapolis, jeopardizing her grip over DHS and putting her standing with Trump on thin ice. Although some in Trump's inner circle have tried to persuade the president to fire her and Lewandowski, he has so far resisted, saying publicly he has no plans to fire her. Lawmakers from both parties have been critical, and Democrats in Congress are demanding changes to the department's enforcement methods, threatening to hold DHS funding. Now, Noam and Lewandowski have embarked on a rehabilitation tour, and they have worked to hastily solidify their relationship with the president, requesting an Oval Office meeting with Trump 2 days after the Pretty shooting. Noam's team scheduled a series of press conferences on other matters, including an event highlighting airport security in Miami and an announcement about the border wall in Arizona. All right, let's take a look at what's going on in the world of the arts and culture. All right. This is a television review, and it says, headline, "Two Stalwarts Keep the Comedy Coming." Best watched from a bar stool at Moe's, the 800th episode of The Simpsons is a remarkable thing in terms of longevity, as is the kickoff of Family Guy, season 24. I've always thought that Family Guy has long served as a decoy, because no matter how deplorable Homer Simpson might be, Peter Griffin will be worse. Peter would consider it a competition. Homer would have a donut. And I don't know either show, so I'm kind of in the dark here about this, but I will keep reading. Having established themselves as among a handful of television's longest-running scripted shows, the two comedies have always shared certain characteristics. Sunday night slots on Fox, obviously, at least most of the time, a refined sense of the ribald most of the time, a surgical approach to the flaws and foibles of American society, and architectural trademarks, though that's one place where they diverge. The Family Guy shtick has long included the extended digression, though it would be hard to ever top the Emmy-nominated, quote, Down Syndrome Girl, close quote, the musical aside as Broadway-style extravaganza. The latest episode doesn't try. Instead, it ventures into something creator Seth MacFarlane and company usually avoid. In other words, genuine pathos. Stewie, the Brit-accented infant and former matricidal maniac, gets into Brian's edibles, and he gets high and is put in foster care and sent home after Lois takes an online parenting class. The tiny fellow promptly gets back into the gummies, which he slips into Mom's wine. And I think we will stop there. And let me just pause, and I'll be right back. Okay, thank you. Welcome back. All right, this next is a film review about a movie entitled Wuthering Heights, which was written, I think, in the 1800s. It's a classic romance. I guess it was written in 1847. The most 2026 element of the latest screen adaptation of the novel Wuthering Heights is the scene in which Heathcliff repeatedly asks the young lady he's undressing, quote, "Do you want me to stop?" close quote, even as she writhes with lust, indicating an affirmative response is unlikely. Previously understood as a notorious brute, even by 19th century standards, Heathcliff now exhibits signs of having earned perfect grades in today's campus training modules. There's also a reference to septicemia, which is the director's perhaps too technical stab at explaining the nonspecific Victorian disease that afflicts one character. Mostly, however, the director, who is Emerald Fennell, has done an admirable job of not modernizing a dark and moody romance. If most of today's filmmakers crave hearing, quote, "This is not your mother's," and then the name of the movie, close quote, when adapting classic material, this pretty much is your mother's Wuthering Heights, or at least one she will recognize. Catherine Earnshaw, played with great soapy gusto by Margot Robbie, is still the same judgment-impaired social climbing drama queen as ever. And Ms. Fennell frequently associates her with a rich, decadent red, the color of the bordello, to suggest that she has unwisely traded her body for riches. Ms. Fennell, who won an Oscar for writing the feminist parable entitled Promising Young Woman, close quote, does not bother suggesting that Catherine is a victim of society's impossible expectations for women, which allows her, therefore, to focus on the core story without intrusive mutters of disapproval for 19th century mores. The plot is a template for every Harlequin romance about a woman caught between a sexy beast and a languid but wealthy wimp. Catherine, who lives with her frequently drunk father, played by Martin Clunes, on a struggling Yorkshire estate called Wuthering Heights, grows up with a wild, apparently orphaned boy adopted by her father after being found hapless in the street. The boy at first doesn't even talk and seems to have no name, so Catherine calls him Heathcliff. As an adult, he's played by Jacob Elordi, who is an excellent match for Ms. Robbie, both in comeliness and star power. The pair grow up best friends and even sleep in the same bed. The desperate attraction between them is evident to both, but Catherine has her sights set on a higher status mate than this mere stable boy. After much figurative and literal peering over the walls of the posh neighboring estate, which is called Thrushcross Grange, she twists an ankle and becomes a 6-week house guest of the gentleman who owns it, who is the wealthy Edgar Linton. He lives with his ward, Isabella Heathcliff, in agony. He lives with his ward, Isabella Heathcliff, in agony, and moves away without notice while Catherine marries Edgar. Anyway, the director has greatly streamlined the complicated plot of the novel written by Emily Bronte, eliminating the framing device, the supernatural element. Other adaptations have made similar excisions, and yet the latest version is luxuriantly long, fully half an hour longer than the much-beloved 1939 film directed by William Wyler, starring Merle Oberon, Laurence Olivier, and David Niven in 1939. The director here, Ms. Fennell, is a millennial who might have been expected to make the material slick or hip or at least fast. She has done none of that. The story is a slow burn, as it should be, an extended sonata of moaning winds, crackling storms, smoldering glances, and heaving bosoms. When you've got two actors as luminous as Robbie and Elordi, you don't need them to say clever things, and they don't. Having simplified matters, the director here sloughs off the psychological depth of the novel and instead lavishes attention on the heavy breathing and the decor, and exhibiting much interest in the ornate mansion in which the Linton family lives. For example, one room is set aside for ribbons only. And the costumes and accessories with which Ms. Robbie is gloriously draped. Catherine essentially becomes a character in a Sofia Coppola movie who grows increasingly trapped and anguished in proportion to her cosseting. A slate of songs by a singer named Charlie XCX captures Catherine's tragic self-absorption without seeming jarringly modern. The movie is very much aimed at female viewers, and Heathcliff is less robustly drawn than in some previous iterations, driven mainly by carnal lust rather than a more all-encompassing rage. And we'll stop there. Pardon me. And let me remind you that you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Let's see here. Parlays. Here's a theater review in a play called The Unknown, starring Sean Hayes, who was in that long-running TV show called 2.5 Men. He played opposite Charlie Sheen, and I'm making a mistake. Mr. Hayes rose to fame as the flamboyant sidekick Jack in the long-running show Will and Grace. And in this play, he gives his finest stage performance to date. He starred in a middling revival of the musical Promises, Promises, and then won a Tony for playing Oscar Levant in Goodnight Oscar, despite being flagrantly miscast, in my view, said the writer. Now, in this show, which is, I say, entitled The Unknown, he portrays not only Elliot, but all the people he interacts with, and differentiates them crisply with convincing accents, but without costume changes or flashy mannerisms. Elliot is the narrator and central character. He's never understood how writers become stalled, empty of fresh ideas, until it happens to him. He retreats to a remote farmhouse in upstate New York with no Wi-Fi, turns into the stuff of nightmares when Elliot hears someone singing a yearning love song outside the house, but he cannot find the source of the song. He's particularly disoriented because it's a tune from a musical he wrote. When he flees back to the city, he finds a piece of paper with the song's title, the song title was I Wish You'd Wanted Me, taped to his mailbox. Has Eliot, a successful writer but no celebrity, somehow acquired a stalker? Well, in his frustration and isolation, he's a single gay man in his 40s, Eliot confesses that Larry and Chloe, owners of that upstate house, are virtually his only friends. Eliot heads to a nearby gay bar one night where he falls into conversation with a friendly guy named Keith over too many glasses of gay bar red, with disastrous results. He wakes up woozy the next morning to find the title of that song written in black pen across his stomach. So yes, definitely a stalker. David Cale is the author of this show, The Unknown. He is also a performer and a writer. And he's written several shows and has developed a remarkable gift for creating suspenseful dramas that remind people of Patricia Highsmith's psychological thrillers, but distilled into the challenging solo play format. The narrative of The Unknown, the name of this play, is ingenious and full of corkscrewy twists without tumbling into implausibility. Keith, it turns out, Keith is the guy he met at the bar, is an embittered actor who failed to land a role in the musical from which that song came. He stole the name Keith from a character in the show. His real name is Joey Dupain. While it would be unfair to detail too many of the maze-like turns in the plot, the freshest surprise from the author of the play, Mr. Cale, comes when Eliot decides to turn the tables on his tormentor and begins to investigate him, even to the point of impersonating him. Amusingly, his motivation isn't so much revenge or anger as career advancement. Joey's behavior has handed Eliot the first few scenes of a potential drama. Rather than let the matter drop or call the police, he decides to attempt to write by enacting the rest of the story himself, taking the leading role or roles. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. Here's an article entitled Ash Wednesday and Our Shared Dust. I guess it's a book entitled Houses of Worship by somebody named T.R. Reed. Like most Americans, I've grown a little relaxed about church attendance. Some Sundays I get up and go to Mass. Other Sundays I sit around reading the paper or head out to the ski slopes. And I don't feel particularly guilty about it, as I surely would have decades ago when our Catholic family religiously avoided meat on Friday and attended church every Sunday morning. But even with this more laid-back attitude, there's one service I always attend, and that's the morning mass on Ash Wednesday on February 18th this year. The day marks the beginning of Lent, which is the most solemn season of repentance in the ecclesiastical year. The gospel reading for Ash Wednesday is from the 6th chapter of Matthew, the chapter in which Jesus teaches the disciples to recite the Lord's Prayer. But in the reading, Jesus goes beyond simply telling us what words to say. The passage teaches us how to pray, and that's a lesson that seems particularly important these days. Jesus said, when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites who love to stand and pray in the synagogues and on street corners so that others may see them. But when you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret. Jesus sets the same rule of secrecy for charity and fasting. When you give alms, Jesus said, do not blow a trumpet before you as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets to win the praise of others. But when you give alms, do not let your left hand know what your right is doing, so that your almsgiving may be secret. When you fast, anoint your head and wash your face, so that you may not appear to be fasting except to your Father, capital F, who is hidden. In the Ash Wednesday Mass, This bracing mandate is followed by a homily from the priest, and then the Ash Wednesday service adds a ritual that seems to run counter to Jesus' admonition to practice faith in private, not on the street corners. This is the blessing and distribution of the ashes. Parishioners proceed to the front of the church, where a priest or a deacon marks a black cross on their foreheads. The mark is made with the moistened ashes of palms that were burned after the previous year's Palm Sunday. And while that ashen cross is being applied, the priest reminds us of a stark biblical lesson. Quote, "Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return." The result is that all those who go to Mass on Ash Wednesday leave the church with a prominent symbol of religious faith marked on their faces, quote, "so that others may see them," close quote. Over the years, many Catholics have wondered about the apparent contradiction between this open display of faith and the Gospel's call for secrecy and public reticence in matters of religion. I find one of the pleasures of the Ash Wednesday Mass each year is watching the pastor's attempts to reconcile the Gospel lesson with the distribution of ashes. One common answer notes that sackcloth and ashes have been, since biblical times, a sign of repentance. So that ashen cross proves an appropriate start to Lent's season of repentance, a time to get things right in your life. The ashes don't say, quote, "what a great Christian I am," but rather, "I must become a better person." Another explanation is that the ashes aren't meant to be a billboard aimed at others. They serve instead to remind Catholics that they are members of an enormous community. We are not isolated from one another in our faith, and perhaps more to the point, we are not isolated from the whole of God's creation. The ashes are delivered with a reminder of mortality. No matter how important or successful we imagine ourselves, no matter how much we act as though we rise above the rest of the created world, one message remains true: ashes to ashes, dust to dust. That has always seemed to me a good message to take away as we walk out of the church at the end of the Ash Wednesday Mass. A good message as we travel ever further down the ultimate dusty path. Interesting. I can't disagree with anything he said. All right, here, we are nearing the end of our time together. Let's see if in the business section there's anything that might be of interest to you. Crypto meltdowns. Computer chips. Nissan projects $4.2 billion loss for fiscal year. FedEx sees revenue growth. Let's see. Not really. Not seeing anything here that I think would be of interest to anybody. Well, here's an interesting quandary. Headline: cash bonus or more vacation time? Which do you choose and why? When it comes to rewarding workers financially, cash is not always king. Companies frequently give employees monetary bonuses, but a new study suggests that paid vacation time is a perk employers should also consider. The study says that while they didn't explicitly look into whether employees prefer time off, the study found that receiving extra vacation time rather than bonus money makes workers feel less like a mere cog on a wheel and more like people who are recognized and valued as individuals with a life beyond work. It makes them feel more human. And that feeling benefits employers as well as employees. Feeling more human is strongly correlated with higher job satisfaction, with greater engagement with work, better relationships with colleagues, and less inclinations to leave the job. In one experiment, researchers asked about 1,500 participants to recall times when they received a monetary bonus or paid time off, and all had received both.
The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,